It's 16:30 Universal Time, and this is VOA News Now.
U.S. diplomats in southern China meet for a second time with the detained crew of a U.S. spy plane.
Israel warns the Palestinians of relentless retaliation unless security forces bring a halt to anti-Israeli attacks.
Those stories, business news, and more. It's all ahead on VOA News Now.
Hello again. I'm Elizabeth Thao with Frank Whitus in Washington.
U.S. diplomats in southern China have met for a second time with the detained crew of a U.S. spy plane. U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell today told reporters here in Washington the meeting lasted for about 1 hour. He says the head of the American delegation reported the crew is in good spirits and is being treated well. Mr. Powell says another meeting with the plane's crew is expected tomorrow, Saturday, and that the United States is seeking more on a regular basis until the standoff is resolved. Mr. Powell says intense negotiations are underway to win release of the Americans. He says the U.S. and Chinese sides are exchanging what he calls rather precise ideas on how to bring the matter to a conclusion. President Bush yesterday expressed regret over the apparent loss of the Chinese pilot. Beijing welcomed the president's statement, but the Chinese are still insisting on an apology.
Well, as the diplomatic efforts continue to win the release of the crew, there's a warning about the impact of further delay from the Pentagon. More from VOA defense correspondent Alex Belida.
The White House and State Department are signaling progress in the intensive talks now underway aimed at ending the diplomatic standoff. But at the Pentagon, a senior official has issued a word of warning. Speaking on condition of anonymity, this official says further delays in winning the release of the 24 crew members of the EP-3 will, in his words, only serve to embolden those opposed to good relations between the United States and China. Putting it another way, he says the longer the standoff, the smaller the window for avoiding possible long-term repercussions. The EP-3 made an emergency landing on China's Hainan Island Sunday after colliding with a Chinese fighter jet in international airspace over the South China Sea. China is seeking a U.S. apology for the incident. After their latest meeting with the crew members, U.S. officials report they're in good spirits. Pentagon sources say when they're released, a special aircraft will be dispatched to pick them up. At China's insistence, that plane will be civilian, not military. The crew is then likely to be flown to Hawaii for debriefings. As for their plane, a 4-engine turboprop surveillance aircraft packed with sophisticated radar and other electronic equipment, Pentagon officials believe China will eventually return it, but they say it may be returned in pieces after Chinese intelligence officials remove what they want from the plane. The crew is believed to have followed standing orders to destroy or disable the secret equipment as well as classified data and documents on board. Pentagon spokesman Rear Admiral Craig Quigley says defense authorities have also taken what he terms prudent measures to minimize any possible security compromise. He declines to give details. Alex Belida, VOA News, the Pentagon.
First, the summary of world news.
I'm Imani Crosby, VOA News. President Bush says progress is being made in talks aimed at securing the release of the detained crew of a U.S. surveillance plane in southern China. Speaking to business leaders outside Washington, Mr. Bush said he talked by telephone with Brigadier General Neil Seelock, who met with the crew for about an hour Friday.
We shared some information between the crew. I checked on their health and welfare. I did find out that those items that we have asked to be provided to our crew have been provided to the crew in a humanitarian gesture.
President Bush expressed praise for the 21-man, 3-woman crew, which has been detained since their surveillance plane made an emergency landing on Hainan after colliding with a Chinese fighter jet April 1st. The Chinese aircraft was lost after the collision, and its pilot is presumed dead. U.S. officials say intense negotiations are underway to win the release of the Americans. Israeli forces.
The Chinese jet, which went down after the collision, was much more maneuverable and therefore unlikely to have been hit by the U.S. plane.
typically, when people are doing these intercepts, if they're doing them professionally, they maintain a reasonable distance from the airplane to begin with, and they're in visual contact with it. So if the Chinese pilot lost visual contact, that's, again, the Chinese pilot's fault and not the fault of the U.S. aircraft commander. The more maneuverable airplanes are supposed to get out of the way. The larger airplane has the right-of-way.
Now, this is a slightly different case just in that it is a surveillance plane. The other planes are coming to kind of get it out of the way and not wanting it to be there to spy on their communications. Is that the rules still apply exactly in the same way as in an ordinary passenger plane or anything else?
Well, no. The rules actually, there are no rules for these because over the years, countries that monitor each other's communications, there's a very long history of this, of course, and for many, many years the Soviets flew long-range flights along the United States coastline and were routinely intercepted and escorted, is the term that is most often used, by a pair of fighters that go up simply to let the intruding airplane know that the U.S. is aware that it's there, and that's usually it. It's usually a standoff. This seems to have been an accident. It seems clear that nobody tries to collide with an airplane, and somebody got too close.
This did occur by both sides in international airspace. Now, having to have force on landing...
Let me just interrupt you there, because the whole question of international airspace is a little bit muddy. There's an international limit in terms of territorial waters. But a lot of countries maintains, the U.S., for example, has a zone called the Air Defense Identification Zone in which an aircraft is expected to identify itself, and those extend for a couple hundred miles out to sea.
The plane had to land in Chinese territory. I assume there are protocols for handling planes that have to land in terms of accidents, especially when they're passenger planes. What are they the same again when it's a surveillance plane?
Well, again, the rules that apply in these kinds of sort of well, I don't know whether they call them games, but there is a sort of cat and mouse game that kind of characterizes these encounters, and clearly the countries who are involved in them kind of make up the rules as they go along. There is no specific treaty to which the U.S. is a signatory that I'm aware of that spells out the rules for how the airplane or its crew had to be handled. This is mainly a diplomatic exercise at this point, and it's already departed from any sort of rules that would apply to, let's say, an airliner making an emergency landing.
Do you see that there would be a great difference in response had the situation been reversed, a Chinese plane coming close to the United States and then being forced to land?
Well, that's purely academic because the Chinese don't have any airplanes that are capable of any sort of mission, even closely resembling, even distantly resembling what the EP-3 was on. They don't have long-range patrol airplanes. And they, so far as we know, don't conduct any surveillance flights along the coast. In the past, when airplanes of interest to U.S. intelligence have landed on foreign soil, the U.S. has ignored requests for return of the airplane and has gone into it with its intelligence community to discover what sort of technology is aboard it. And the most famous case of this was probably a MiG-25 aircraft that landed in Japan, in which the U.S., of course, was able to disassemble the airplane and learn a lot about it. And it knew none of that information before the airplane landed in Japan. So it was a real intelligence windfall.
George Larson, editor of Air and Space magazine, speaking with VOA News Now's Elizabeth Arrett.
Listen to the president.
A short time ago, I had the opportunity to speak to the 24 members of our United States flight crew and welcome them home to America. I told them they represent the best of American patriotism and service to their country. They did their duty with honor and with great professionalism. They are a reminder of the debt of gratitude all Americans owe to the men and women who wear our country's uniform and who voluntarily risk their lives in the service of freedom. We're proud of our crew, and I am glad that they will be with their families this Easter weekend. I know I speak for all Americans in saluting their courage and the extraordinary skill of the pilot, Navy Lieutenant Osborne, who guided the severely damaged aircraft to an emergency landing that saved 24 lives. We're looking forward to talking with the flight crew about exactly how the accident happened. From all the evidence we have seen, the United States aircraft was operating in international airspace in full accordance with all laws, procedures, and regulations, and did nothing to cause the accident. The United States and China have agreed that representatives of our governments will meet on April 18th to discuss the accident. I will ask our United States representative to ask the tough questions about China's recent practice of challenging United States aircraft operating legally in international airspace. Reconnaissance flights are a part of a comprehensive national security strategy that helps maintain peace and stability in our world. During the last 11 days, the United States and China have confronted strong emotions, deeply held and often conflicting convictions, and profoundly different points of view. China's decision to prevent the return of our crew for 11 days is inconsistent with the kind of relationship we have both said we wish to have. As we move forward, the United States and China will no doubt again face difficult issues and fundamental disagreements. We disagree on important basic issues such as human rights and religious freedom. At times we have different views about the path to a more stable and secure Asian Pacific region. We have different values, yet common interests in the world. We agree on the importance of trade, and we want to increase prosperity for our citizens. We want the citizens of both our countries to enjoy the benefits of peace in the world. So we need to work together on global security problems, such as preventing the spread of weapons of mass destruction. I will always stand squarely for American interests and American values, and those will no doubt sometimes cause disagreements with China. Yet I will approach our differences in a spirit of respect. The kind of incident we have just been through does not advance a constructive relationship between our two countries. Both the United States and China must make a determined choice to have a productive relationship that will contribute to a more secure, more prosperous, and more peaceful world. I know I speak for all Americans when I say welcome home to our flight crew. I want to thank the families for your patience and for your sacrifice. And I wish all my fellow Americans a rich and meaningful Easter and Passover. God bless.
You've just been listening to a special statement by President Bush at the Rose Garden. We had thought he might be taking questions from reporters, but apparently has decided not to do so. During his remarks, he said that he had spoken to members of the crew, told the crew that it represented the best of American patriotism and service, and that the crew did its duty with honor and great professionalism. And he was also saying that he was glad that the crew members would be with their families this Easter weekend, and he again praised the crew and the pilot for its courage in dealing with this accident.
It is 10:30 Universal Time, and this is VOA News Now. Hello again, everyone. I'm Steve Norman in Washington. Coming up in this half hour on the best of Talk to America, find out what physical fitness can do for you. It's time now for the news. Here's Dara Steen.
Thank you, Steve. The Moscow headquarters of Russia's only independent nationwide television network, NTV, is in the hands of new managers who began immediately firing journalists who reject their authority. Some journalists opposed to the new management reported on the events on NTV for about 4 minutes until the broadcast went off the air. NTV later resumed broadcasting with newscasts by those who support the new management. The United States and China are trading accusations as to who caused the April 1st collision between a U.S. spy plane and a Chinese fighter jet over international waters. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld blamed China and one of its pilots for the collision, calling it the culmination of months of aggressive Chinese flying designed to intimidate U.S. plane crews. China accuses the United States of seeking excuses to avoid taking responsibility for the collision and promises a full investigation. The two sides will meet Wednesday to discuss the cause of the crash, how to avoid future incidents, and the return of the spy plane, which remains on China's Hainan Island.
The Chinese said the Bush administration had apologized for the mid-air collision that left a Chinese pilot missing and forced the American plane to land on Hainan Island. Afterwards, President Bush said the Chinese conduct was inappropriate and that the surveillance flights would continue. Meanwhile, the president faces a series of tough decisions in the next few months that will affect Chinese-American relations. Joe, what's your assessment? Who won, who lost, or let me put it this way. How did George W. Bush, less than 100 days in office, do during these 11 days as president?
2 points. I think after a stumble the first day or two where I think he set the wrong tone, I think the administration handled it remarkably well. And I think this is virtually the unanimous view of the sort of administration watchers and foreign policy analysts. They handle it with sophistication, with firmness, and showed great understanding of the complexities of the China situation. But I think on the other side, Fred, if I look at how the Chinese turned out, I think the Chinese have suffered a significant setback in the sense that on the eve of some of the most critical decisions affecting their interest, as the WTO, normalization of trade, the Olympics, arms to Taiwan, with some of these issues still being debated, what they did, it maybe didn't ensure that they're all going to go the wrong way, but they certainly did not help the China's case in getting decisions that they're seeking. So I think on balance, in strategic terms, they did not do well at all.
Okay, Marty?
I agree with Joe that George Bush started off a bit uncertain. Probably his first initial comments, harsh comments, did not help the cause of bringing home the U.S. troops who were held as prisoners, no doubt about it, well kept, well fed, well housed, but prisoners nonetheless by China. And then cooler heads took over. Secretary of State Colin Powell emerged as the voice who would be listened to. And I think that the United States did what it needed to do to get the troops freed and get them back, which had to be a major objective. You know, the Chinese are famous for taking the long view of...
Amy Feldman says the survey